Imagine standing at the edge of the world, commanding 10,000 horsemen. You are a general of the great Khan. You have conquered cities, toppled empires, and hold the power of life and death over multitudes. You wear silk captured from China and drink wine looted from Persia. You are a god of war. But when the summons comes from the golden tent, your blood runs cold. You tremble. Why? Because in the eyes of Genghis Khan, you aren't a king, a lord, or even a free man. You are property. Most history books tell you about the brutality Genghis Khan inflicted on his enemies: the pyramids of skulls, the burning cities, the rivers running red. But they rarely talk about the terrifying psychological cage he built for his own friends. The Mongol Empire wasn't just built on arrows and horses, it was built on a unique, ruthless, and terrifying system of servitude that blurred the lines between a supreme commander and a helpless slave. It was a system where rising to the top didn't grant you freedom, it just made your leash shorter. Today, we are diving deep into the paradox of the Mongol war machine to uncover why the men who terrified the world were arguably the most terrified of all. To understand the terror, we first have to shatter a common illusion. We tend to romanticize the Mongols as free spirits of the steppe, riding wherever the wind took them, bound by nothing but the open sky. And for centuries, before Genghis Khan, that was largely true. Tribal loyalty was fluid. If a chieftain was weak, you just packed up your yurt and left to join a stronger rival. Freedom was the currency of the steppe. Genghis Khan killed that freedom. When he unified the tribes in 1206, he didn't just create a super tribe, he fundamentally re-engineered Mongol society. He obliterated the old tribal lines and replaced them with a decimal system: the Arban, Zun, Mingan, and Tumun. This wasn't just military organization, it was a social prison. No one was allowed to leave their assigned unit. To leave was desertion, the punishment was death. To accept a deserter was theft, the punishment was war. For the generals, this meant their power base was entirely artificial. They commanded men not because of ancestral loyalty or personal charisma, but because the Khan lent them the men. The free nomad was dead, replaced by a soldier serf bound to a chain of command that ended with one man. The generals knew that the moment they stopped being useful, the Khan could simply assign their 10,000 men to someone else, leaving them with nothing, not even their own identity. The Mongol concept of slavery was complex. There were different tiers, but the term that haunted the elite was bool, often translated as bondservant or slave. In the secret history of the Mongols, even high-ranking officials and family members of the Khan were described using language that implied ownership. Unlike the chattel slavery of the American South or the Roman Empire, where slaves were manual laborers at the bottom of society, Mongol slavery could exist at the very top. A general could be a bool. This meant that while he could command armies and govern provinces, his body and life belonged to the Khan. There was no concept of human rights or due process. This terrified the generals because it removed the safety net of nobility. In Europe, a duke could rebel against a king and perhaps negotiate a truce because he had his own land and rights. In the Mongol system, a general was merely a tool in the Khan's hand. If the tool was dull, you discarded it. This created a hyper-competitive, paranoid environment where generals constantly had to prove their absolute submission. They weren't fighting for glory, they were fighting to justify their existence to their owner. One of Genghis Khan's most brilliant and sinister inventions was the Kashig, or the Imperial Guard. On the surface, this was the highest honor a Mongol could achieve. To be chosen for the Kashig was to serve the Khan personally, to guard his tent, and to prepare his food. It was the fast track to becoming a general. Subutai and Jeeb, the greatest dogs of war, rose through these ranks. But there was a darker purpose. The Kashig was essentially a massive hostage system. Genghis Khan required the sons of his generals and unit commanders to serve in the guard. Think about the psychological pressure on a general campaigning 3,000 miles away in Persia. He might be tempted to hoard loot, to disobey an order, or to set himself up as a petty king. But he knows that his eldest son is sleeping 10 feet away from Genghis Khan every night. If the general betrays the Khan, the son dies. The Kashid ensured that the loyalty of the generals was guaranteed by the blood of their children. It turned the Khan's personal security force into a terrifying mechanism of control, where the honor of service was actually a gilded cage. The cost of failure or betrayal in the Mongol system was total. Genghis Khan did not believe in individual punishment for major crimes, he believed in collective responsibility. If a general committed treason, or even if he failed incompetently due to cowardice, the punishment wasn't just his execution. It was the destruction of his entire lineage, a policy often called pulling up the root and branch. This meant killing the general, his children, his grandchildren, and often his servants. For a Mongol, whose spiritual immortality depended on the survival of his clan and the burning of incense by his descendants, this was a fate worse than death. It was spiritual annihilation. This policy terrified the generals into a state of hyper-obedience. We see instances in history where Mongol commanders would rather commit suicide than return to the Khan with news of a defeat. They knew that their personal failure would doom everyone they loved. This is why the Mongol armies were so relentless. The generals were driven by a fear that far outweighed their fear of the enemy's swords. They were running from the monster behind them, not the one in front of them. As Genghis Khan's conquests grew, so did the wealth of his empire. But the distribution of this power revealed the ultimate glass ceiling for his generals. No matter how brilliant a general was, no matter if he was Subutai, who conquered 32 nations and won 65 pitched battles, he could never be the ruler. Rule was restricted strictly to the Altan Uruk, the golden family of Genghis Khan. Generals were forced to accept that they were merely stewards. They could govern a city, but they could not own it. This distinction is crucial. In feudal Europe, a king would grant land to a knight, and that land became the knight's property to pass down. Genghis Khan granted rights to tax, but he retained ownership of the land and the people. This kept the generals in a permanent state of dependency. They were wealthy only as long as the Khan allowed the cash flow. They had no independent economic base to fund a rebellion. This economic slavery was just as potent as the physical kind. They were billionaires on paper, but paupers in reality, because their bank account could be frozen by the Khan with a single word. We often praise Genghis Khan for his meritocracy, promoting men based on ability rather than birth. And while this is true, we rarely discuss the terrifying side effect of this system for the established generals. In a hereditary system, a general feels safe because his position is protected by his bloodline. In Genghis Khan's meritocracy, there was always a hungry, younger, more violent wolf waiting behind you. A general could not rest on his laurels. If he slowed down, if he aged, if he hesitated, he could be replaced instantly by a nobody from the ranks who showed more promise. This created a culture of extreme anxiety. Generals pushed themselves and their men to the breaking point because they knew they were disposable. The slave system wasn't just about chains, it was about the commoditization of talent. You were only as valuable as your last victory. This is why we see elderly Mongol generals still leading charges and taking insane risks. They were terrified of becoming obsolete, which in the Mongol court, was a prelude to becoming dead. The terror wasn't limited to the military commanders. As the Mongols besieged sophisticated cities in China and the Islamic world, they realized they needed expertise they didn't possess. They needed siege engineers, doctors, astronomers, and scribes. These intellectuals were captured and integrated into the machine. For a Mongol general, this was a source of friction and fear. Suddenly, the Khan was listening to a captured Chinese engineer or a Persian accountant more than his own blood-sworn commanders. These technocrat slaves held immense power because they controlled the logistics and the siege engines. Generals found themselves reliant on the very people they had conquered. If a siege failed because the catapults didn't work, the general took the blame, not the slave engineer. The generals had to manage these specialized slaves with extreme care, knowing that the Khan valued the engineer's knowledge more than the general's pride. It was a humiliating inversion of the social order, where the warrior had to bow to the expertise of the prisoner. The true horror of this system revealed itself fully after Genghis Khan died. While the great Khan demanded absolute loyalty, he was generally fair to those who served him well. His successors, however, were paranoid. Because the generals were technically property of the Khanate, they became pawns in the civil wars between Genghis's sons and grandsons. We see the terrifying Great Purges under Ogidi and Gayuk, and later under Monk Khan. Entire branches of the military aristocracy were wiped out because they were owned by the wrong prince. Generals realized that their slavery wasn't just to the throne, but to the specific faction holding the throne. A general who had served faithfully for 40 years could be executed simply because his owner lost a political debate in the capital. The system Genghis built to ensure unity eventually turned into a meat grinder for the Mongol elite, proving that in an empire of absolute power, no one is safe, not even the conquerors. The Mongol Empire remains one of history's greatest anomalies. It was a civilization that conquered half the known world on the back of speed, discipline, and terror. But the terror wasn't just an export, it was an internal fuel. Genghis Khan's genius lay not just in how he fought enemies, but in how he enslaved his own command structure. He turned proud tribal chieftains into anxious, obedient servants, terrified of the leash. He built a system where the only path to safety was total, unquestioning submission. The generals who rode across the steppes, striking fear into the hearts of kings from Poland to Korea, did so because they were running from a greater fear at home. They were the masters of the world, but they were slaves to the Khan. What do you think? Was this brutal system of total control the only way to keep such a massive empire together, or was it the seed of its eventual destruction? I want to hear your take in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark mechanics of history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.